Please contrast this ending with the original. Let's see if anyone can guess which one is which. Here we go. She leaned back, letting the rocker gently sway. The first time in weeks, the word freedom wasn't laced with irony. Taking a deep breath, she opened her laptop. It was time to start the fight. For a moment, all they could do was stare at each other. She felt her blood run cold. That was her cue. With shaking hands, she tucked the document into her shirt pocket, closed the door, and bolted it. Just the soft sound of people needing help, and she would help them. Not with lawyers or fines, but with knowledge. Let me know your thoughts. Also, don't forget to vote for the ending you want to see more of. This story is part of my Substack newsletter where every Saturday I publish a new story along with commentary on the writing process, publishing, and everything else going on in my life. If you enjoy my work and want to support me, consider subscribing to my Substack. There's a link in the description below. I appreciate any support. She didn't start a fight. She started a change. And the night, for the first time in weeks, felt like it belonged to them again. The wind passed over her shoulder, gentle as a whisper. She smiled and typed the first words. How I made the sky mine, better safe than sorry. She ran to the basement window, ripped off the covering she'd taped to the glass, and stared out. Then the screen door slammed. She stiffened, every instinct screaming at her to run. Slowly, tentatively, she unflattened herself on the floor, unlocked the door. Relief flooded through her, leaving her weak. She stepped onto the porch, hand gripping the banister, the digital copy of the FAA ruling clutched in her other hand. The moonlight spilled across the porch steps. And Layla sat alone in her Adirondack chair, her laptop open, fingers resting quietly on the keyboard. Not yet. She just listened. The faint hum of a drone overhead had stopped 3 nights ago, the last of the HOA's aerial surveillance. Now, her home was silent. Finally, earlier that week, she had invoked the little-known FAA zoning, Section 107.41, restricted airspace over residential private dwellings due to safety and privacy concerns. It was unheard of in their suburban cul-de-sac. But it worked. Now, not even the HOA could fly their drones. Not without her written permission. She saved the digital letter she'd received confirmation from the FAA. An invisible barrier drawn above her roofline. The windows, once always shuttered, stood open. Curtains fluttered. The scent of jasmine wafted in from the garden. Across the street, porch lights flicked on. Neighbors stood in quiet clusters. They weren't talking about lawns or garbage bins anymore. They were watching Layla, not with suspicion but with something new. The house lurched. Footsteps pounded on the concrete, coming closer, faster. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. She couldn't think, couldn't breathe. What was he doing? Why was he here? Scrambling, she slammed the screen door shut, fumbled with the deadbolt, finally got it locked, and slid down the door side until her back was flat against the floor. Then, pressed against the cool wood, she waited, her breath catching in her throat. Every second stretched into an eternity. Then silence. Was it over? Had he given up? He was in the street, his face pale, eyes dark, staring directly at her. He was gone. The wind returned that night, soft and warm. It rustled through the neighborhood like an old friend. Tomorrow, she knew there would be knocks. Not urgent, not aggressive. Okay, so which one did you think was the original ending and which one did you think was the new one? This is a science fiction story about drones and privacy. The sky had barely brightened when Miriam heard the familiar hum. Not bees, not breeze. A drone. It hovered like a metal wasp beyond her bedroom window, lenses glinting coldly. She reached for the folder beneath her bed, thick now, with printouts and state maps. Each flight path, each incident, each image caught peering into her life. The Homeowners Association called it community monitoring. Miriam called it surveillance. At least 4 other homes along the river had posted similar warnings. She found handwritten notes on her windshield. Take your trash bins in. Your flag is out. She took 2 pies to the Davises, the de facto leaders of the neighborhood. But when they answered the door, all smiles and casual waves, she saw a flicker in their eyes, a hesitation in their smiles. She had bigger fish to fry, like figuring out how to safely remove invasive species from the riverbank. The drone hovered, its shadow falling across her work area. She glanced up at the sky, frowning. Who was flying today? She hoped it was just one of the new residents trying to get a lay of the land. There were plenty of birds here, lots of squirrels chasing each other up and down trees. Maybe if she installed a bird feeder, there would be more butterflies too. She smiled. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, a sense of belonging. And Miriam finally looked up to see who was spying on her this time. She didn't need to read between the lines. Their body language spoke volumes. Then came the flyover. Miriam stood by her window sipping lemon mint tea when she saw the drone hovering above her backyard. She recognized its model, DJI Mavic Pro. It was the most popular model for hobbyists. That's what they called them, hobbyists. She thought of quadcopters buzzing around her yard, a boy on the sidewalk laughing as he swerved the drone inches from her face. She'd told him to stop, but his parents who had just emerged from their house hadn't. When she confronted them, they shrugged. He's just having fun. Lady, you should lighten up. So she did. She bought a laser pointer, and the next time the boy flew the drone toward her, she flashed the red dot directly into its camera. The boy squealed and fumbled with the controls. The drone dipped, and the laser burned right through the plastic housing the camera. It tumbled to the ground, a tangled mess of wires and propellers. The woman slapped the boy hard. "Stupid. Don't you ever do that again. Do you hear me? Never." Still, it wasn't enough. Not really. She needed to do something big. Something like flying a kite. In the wrong place. And her favorite, diversity, is our weakness. She could feel his eyes on her. She could practically hear his thoughts. What is she doing? What's that crazy thing with the tail? Is it some kind of weapon? Well, she thought, he won't get any footage of that. Or of this. Maryam took a deep breath, feeling the tension draining from her shoulders. The fight had taken years off her, turned her hair grayer, her skin thinner. She understood now why the women she had replaced had packed up and left. But she had nowhere else to go. This was her home. This was where her roots ran deep. And by God, she was going to stay. She wasn't going to be chased away. She straightened her shoulders, pulling in another deep breath. As she met her neighbor's eye, she raised her chin and flashed a smile. Maybe it was the kite, maybe it was the wind, but for a moment, she felt free. Her neighbors never quite looked comfortable around her. Her presence didn't seem to fit. Her daughter, Lena, noticed it too. "Mom, why don't they want us here?" "They don't want people like us here, honey," Maryam replied, kneeling beside her daughter to untangle a fishing line. "But we're gonna show them we belong." It was a long way from the day she moved in and received the welcome basket. From the HOA, Mr. Davenport. How could she have forgotten? How could she have been so naive? His smile, all teeth and niceness. As he explained the rules of their little community, "We try to keep our property values high here. Don't you know? Mrs. Khan, you know, we do encourage everyone to embrace the community spirit. Say, you wouldn't mind keeping your grass a standard height, would you? And if you do decide to install a security camera, we'd appreciate it if you could opt for a discreet model that doesn't, draw attention or look, well, ethnic, if you know what I mean." Maryam had laughed uncomfortably, clutching the basket of HOA literature, including a 3-ring binder with rules and regulations that rivaled those of an exclusive country club. Private security patrols, restrictions on parking, landscaping, and even light colors. Of course, there were rules about boats. No wake zones are strictly enforced. And remember, speed limits apply to boaters too. She remembered how he'd lingered on that last point. Downstairs, her tea steeped in a chipped mug. The scent of mint filled the room as the curtains fluttered half in rhythm with her breath, half with the early breeze that slipped through the screen. She opened her back door slowly, letting the creak of the hinge echo through the morning stillness. Out front, a black SUV, idled. Inside, a board member waited, pretending to check messages, but always watching. One of many faces Miriam had watched come and go over the past 5 years. Since she moved here seeking peace and quiet, a place to build her life after a brutal divorce. At first, this neighborhood had seemed like a good choice. Lush green lawns, separated by hedges and trees, winding paths. Until things began to happen. Today, Miriam didn't wave. She walked to her porch garden instead, past native sage and mountain mint. To the small metal stake she had placed in the soil last week, it held no flag. Just a laminated notice from the FAA. Private no-fly airspace, established, conservation corridor. The drone sputtered in air. Its operator hesitated, and Miriam felt a smile tugging at her lips. It was a small victory, yes, but every little bit counted. If they were watching, which she knew they were, then they would see this. They would see that they couldn't break her. She wouldn't let them. Not anymore. There had been so many of these notices lately. This neighborhood was becoming an island of resistance in a sea of compliance. Over the next few months, Miriam noticed things. Whispers behind cupped hands as she passed by, sideways glances, comments shouted from behind fences. Well, she tried. For a while, she made the best sweet potato pie she could remember, the spices warming her kitchen with cinnamon and nutmeg. She stood on her porch watching the white kite dance against the blue sky. Its tail streamed behind it, a bright splash of color. Outside, the whine of a drone sliced through the morning quiet. Miriam barely flinched. This is a story about a woman named Miriam who lived in a very ordinary street. In fact, it was so ordinary that every house looked the same except for the gardens. This made the neighborhood association angry because the rules had been broken. So, they sent her a letter telling her to get rid of the wildflower patch. The next time they sent her a letter, it was filled with threats. But when she got the next letter, she laughed. Those were supposed to be uniform, and the rules specified that every resident should have grass and only grass. If not, you might want to listen up, because this lady sure knew how to do it. Let's take a closer look. One day, Miriam decided to plant some wildflowers. They grew tall and beautiful and soon spread beyond her property line. People from all around the neighborhood would stop by just to take a look. Still, it couldn't do anything about it. It was like watching a small rebellion unfold right before their eyes. In the face of such determination, any attempts to put it down seemed futile. "Hi, I'm here to see Mrs. Miriam," the young man said. "Who's asking?" "It's confidential," the young man replied mysteriously. He was amazed by the variety and abundance of wildlife that had returned to her yard. She felt good knowing that her story would be shared with a wider audience, and that it might even inspire them to do something similar. One day, as Miriam was tending to her garden, she noticed a new visitor. It was a young couple who introduced themselves as James and Emily. It was really inspiring to meet you and learn from someone who has achieved so much, James said. We're excited to start our own garden and hope it will bring us as much joy as it has brought you. She had never had any problems with her neighbors before, and she could unthink of anyone who would want to cause trouble for her. The officer, however, seemed determined to get to the bottom of the complaint. She checked with other officers and even visited Miriam's neighbors to see if they had heard anything. But no one seemed to know anything about the noise or who could have made the complaint. She felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that she had inspired others to follow their dreams. She couldn't understand why someone would try to harm her, especially when she had worked so hard to build a peaceful community. Despite facing some setbacks and challenges, Miriam never gave up on her mission to inspire others. Her story serves as a reminder that even in the face of adversity, one person's passion and determination can make a significant impact. Nevertheless, they explained that they had seen the documentary and were inspired to start their own garden. She also started organizing community events in her garden, inviting people from all over the city. Miriam spent the entire afternoon with them, showing them how to plant, water, fertilize, and maintain. She also shared tips on dealing with pests, diseases, and weeds, as well as advice on how to manage the HOA. Her garden had become more than just a hobby or a passion. It had become a movement, a symbol of hope and change. The next morning, Miriam was watering her plants when she heard the sound of police sirens. She turned around and saw a patrol car driving towards her house. Her heart skipped a beat. "Mrs. Miriam," she said, "I'm here to ask you a few questions about a noise complaint filed by one of your neighbors." "Noise complaint?" "Yes," the officer replied. "Apparently someone called in claiming that there was loud music coming from your property last night." Miriam shook her head in disbelief. "But if you're not her, I guess I'll have to go." "Perfect," the man said with a big smile. "Could you please come to the door?" Miriam didn't ask any questions. Then she led him to the living room and sat him down. "I heard about your garden and wanted to interview you for my project." Miriam nodded understandingly. Over the years, she had received numerous requests from journalists, documentary makers, and even TV talk show hosts. Many of them had invited her to share her story, but she had politely declined. Some were curious, while others secretly wished they had the courage to do something similar themselves. He was genuinely interested in her story. He asked her questions about how she started, what motivated her, what challenges she faced. He also inquired about the reactions from her neighbors and the wider community. She had never thought that her simple act of planting wildflowers would inspire so much interest. Moreover, she was happy to share her experience and encourage others to follow their dreams. Among them was Mrs. Higgins, who lived across the street. At first, she had chosen varieties that were similar to those in Miriam's garden. Soon, her garage was filled with all sorts of plants that were banned by the HOA. She started with just a few pots on her patio and then moved on to window boxers. By the end of summer, she had created a riot of colors and textures that drew people from all over the city. The gentle tinkling of water mixed with the birdsong and created a melody that was both soothing. The sight of dewdrops glistening on spiderwebs and petals was truly magical. Looking at her flourishing plants, Miriam couldn't help but smile. Curious, she went to the window and saw a young man getting out. He was tall and lean with messy brown hair and was dressed in clothes that looked more suited for gardening than for visiting someone important. They seemed to be thriving despite the warnings they had received. Good news, on the other hand, was slid under the door with barely a whisper of a knock. Today was bad news. The letter was stiff and starched, just like Mr. Henderson. Its contents, however, were far from pleasant. The first sentence made it clear that the association was unsatisfied with Miriam's reply to their previous message. In fact, they were quite upset. The penalties would start at $100 and increase by $50 for each subsequent offense. Furthermore, if she continued to defy the HOA, they would turn the matter over to the county for legal action, which could result in fines of up to $500. The final warning was that if she did uncomply after that, the HOA would take away her right to vote at meetings and sell her house at auction to recover the costs. It was a letter from the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. The letter went on to remind Miriam that the law gave the HOA full authority to deal with violations. As usual, the letter ended with a polite request for a response within 72 hours. However, there was no need for Miriam to reply. At 9 a.m. sharp, while the sun was still shyly peeking through the clouds, Miriam watered her garden for the first time. In fact, since the HOA had taken such great interest in her garden, its popularity had grown. Of course, the HOA wasn't happy about this development. And this brings us back to the present. Miriam was enjoying the tranquility of her garden when suddenly she heard the familiar sound of gravel crunching under tires. When he rang the doorbell, Miriam was surprised to find herself opening it. As the conversation progressed, Miriam realized that the young man wasn't just curious. After the interview, Miriam showed the young man around her garden, pointing out different plants and explaining how they benefited the environment. Miriam waved goodbye until she couldn't see him anymore. So, the young man left, and Miriam returned to her daily routine. As the sun began to set, James and Emily thanked Miriam for her help and promised to keep in touch. However, she couldn't help but wonder if her troubles with the HOA were far from over. As the car approached, a young female officer got out and walked towards Miriam. As the officer continued her investigation, Miriam couldn't help but wonder who would do such a thing. In the end, the officer apologized to Miriam for the misunderstanding and left without finding an answer. From then on, Miriam became even more determined to create a positive impact in her neighborhood. As the years passed, Miriam's influence grew and her garden became a hub for eco-conscious individuals who wanted to make a difference. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you are new here, Welcome to this channel where stories unfold, like the ones we share today. Our featured story is called The Signs Are Gone, and it is from an author who has several flash fiction pieces published in places like Smoke Long Quarterly, Jellyfish Review, and others. When I asked our author what they would like me to read, they said, "Surprise me." So here we go. It's definitely more on the poetic side, but I think it's still very much a story. Not a storm, just a hush of drizzle that turned every petal silver, every blade of grass into a mirrored thread. Right off the bat, the author paints a beautiful picture of a rainy day. I might not be the target audience for this particular story, but that doesn't make it any less powerful or effective. Did you connect with it? Did you find it thought-provoking or entertaining? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to stay up to date on all things writing excuses. Thanks again for tuning in, and happy writing. The writing is so vivid. You can feel the soft rain on your skin and see the silver petals glistening in the sunlight. The author also does a great job of using sensory details throughout the story. For example, the scent of earth rose up, rich and grounding. I love how the author uses the sense of smell to bring the reader into the story. We can almost smell the rich, earthy scent of the rain-soaked ground. Later in the story, the author writes, "The air was thick with the scent of sage and rain-soaked stone. Fireflies flickered low, like tiny lanterns patrolling a sanctuary." Once again, the author uses the sense of smell and sight to create a vivid and immersive experience for the reader. I mean, there's plot. Here. There's conflict. There's conflict. There's rising, action, climax, and resolution. For example, the rain can be seen as a symbol of cleansing and renewal. The plants and flowers represent growth and resilience. And the surveillance equipment represents control and invasion of privacy. Through these symbols, the author explores themes of nature versus technology, privacy versus surveillance, and the importance of community. The author also does a great job of building tension throughout the story. For example, the arrival of the signs and the surveillance equipment creates a sense of unease, and foreshadows conflict with the HOA. The protagonist's decision to take action against the HOA raises the stakes, the reader engaged, and the story ending. The story also uses all of the elements, right? There's a character, there's setting, there's dialogue, there's even a little bit of description. Overall, the writing is excellent. The author is clearly very talented and very passionate about what they do. But to be honest, I did have a hard time connecting with this piece. It's just not the kind of story I would typically read and enjoy. But that's okay. This is flash fiction. We're supposed to get outside of our comfort zones. And I do think that reading stories like this will make me a better writer and a better judge. Not a storm, just a hush of drizzle that turned every petal silver. The scent of earth rose up, rich and grounding. Miriam wore her raincoat, but left the hood down. She liked how the raindrops slid down her hair like reminders of how small and alive everything really was. She walked the border of her garden, checking each plant with quiet care. The golden columbine had opened overnight. The bee balm pulsed with red. And along the fence line, a volunteer sunflower stood taller than the rest, angled protectively. Then she noticed it. 3 new signs, staked by the HOA, just beyond her boundary. They were slick, printed, and bold. Yard surveillance for community safety. Exterior modifications must be pre-approved. Native plantings must not obstruct HOA visibility lines. Miriam crouched near her asters, letting her fingers trail through the wet leaves. She didn't scowl. Instead, she stood up slowly and walked back inside. At the kitchen table, she unfolded her zoning map. She highlighted each line of her parcel. Then she opened her laptop and typed an email to the local zoning commission, to the State Environmental Board, and one to a quiet but powerful name at the FAA office, one she'd met years ago at a conservation forum. She attached photographs, coordinates, soil assessments, drone activity. Each click was gentle, but final. By evening, a new letter had been sent. It reminded the HOA that native restoration zones registered with the state could not be altered without multi-agency consultation, and that residential use of surveillance devices above 6 feet required homeowner consent, if facing private windows or gardens. The HOA didn't reply. But the next day, the signs were gone. The surveillance post. A boy from 2 doors down, maybe 10 years old, tiptoed into her yard, barefoot and blinking, and asked if he could just smell the bee flowers. She let him. She showed him where the caterpillars hide on the milkweed. He giggled when one touched his hand with its soft, curious feet. His mother came by later with an apology, but Miriam only smiled. "You can visit any time," she said. "Just don't pick anything. Let it grow." That night, the air was thick with the scent of sage and rain-soaked stone. Fireflies flickered low, like tiny lanterns patrolling a sanctuary. And inside her notebook, Miriam wrote, "They tried to control the air, then they tried the soil. Next, they'll try the water. But roots. Roots. A few things. First off, this is not your typical story. If you enjoyed this story, here are some of my favorite parts. That weekend, the rain came softly. Another thing I want to point out is the symbolism used in the story. Overall, this is a well-written and thought-provoking story that explores important themes in a unique and engaging way. And now, it's time to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Here's your weekly schedule. Check it out. Monday, June 12th, 8 p.m. Eastern. I am doing a live reading from my book, The Wild Places in Conversation with Danny Brash and Ellen Malloy. Voice and Living a Life Less Ordinary. The garden shimmered, still damped from days of rain, each leaf edged in light. She sipped warm tea on the porch, the steam curling around her face like a whisper, where the palm trees are trimmed to keep them short, so they don't block the satellite view, where the paint colors are approved by the Homeowners Association, and the roof tiles must be Spanish style, and the shutters must match the door color. Solar panels and security cameras, the pride and joy of James and Patricia Galloway. Conservative Christians who hadn't spoken to their neighbors, the Jordans, for almost a year. It all began when Mrs. Jordan put up her Christmas lights. Nothing spectacular. Just some wreaths and garlands and reindeer cutouts, and a nativity scene. But when James and Patricia caught sight of it, they felt offended. They marched right up to their neighbor's door and demanded that she turn off the lights or at least hide the religious ones. "I think I'll leave them up until January," she said. And from that moment on, James and Patricia tried everything to make her take them down. They filed complaints with the Homeowners Association. They complained to the police. They even hired a lawyer, but nothing worked. So finally, they decided to build a wall. A solid, concrete wall that would block the Jordans' lights from their view. Every day, they watched as the Jordans strung up more lights. And every day, they added another foot to their wall. Soon, the Jordans' whole front yard was visible only through a narrow crack in the concrete. Mrs. Jordan didn't seem to mind, though she just kept adding more lights. For the next few weeks, James and Patricia enjoyed the peace and quiet. But then one evening while they were eating Triscuits and watching Judge Judy, they noticed something strange. A steady stream of cars pulling into the Jordans' driveway, stopping, unloading sacks of food and boxers of toys. It was like a parade of generosity. And they watched as the Jordans stood in the glow of their porch light, sharing their bounty with the community. James and Patricia couldn't understand it. Why would they give away things they needed? Didn't they know there was a perfectly good home for the holidays? But then one day, James got an idea. He climbed onto his roof and installed his own security camera, aimed directly at the Jordans' front door. He watched as families came and went, piling into their car with goodie bags filled with snacks and board games and handmade ornaments. And he watched as the Jordans' porch light shone brightly, casting long shadows on the wall he had built to keep it out. One day, he even saw a group of kids skipping rope in the Jordans' front yard, and he felt a twinge of regret. Maybe he had been too hasty in his judgment, too quick to assume the worst. Maybe there was more to these lights, more to the Jordans than met the eye. Just then, Patricia joined him on the roof. "What are you doing?" she asked, and James hesitated. Here was his chance to tell her how wrong he had been, how he had judged his neighbors without understanding their ways. But as he looked into her eyes, he knew she wouldn't understand. She would only shake her head and say things like worldly and foolish and sinful. So instead, James changed the subject. "Did you see the new cameras I installed on the south side of the house?" he said. "They have night vision." And together, they scanned the horizon for any signs of flickering lights. Their faces, illuminated, by the glow of their security monitors, except in one house. In one house, the windows are ungainly and bare, and the paint is peeling. That's where old Mr. Henderson has planted his vegetables. Pumpkins the size of car tires crowd the borders. Tomatoes and peppers spill over Squash tendrils invade the meticulously manicured next-door neighbor's perfectly straight petunias. And the okra, don't get me started on the okra. It's an invasion of privacy. It's an assault on aesthetics. It's a violation of property values. And if it were up to Doris Dinglehopper, it would be illegal. Doris is president of the HOA and a self-appointed guardian of good taste, which means she spends her days writing menacing notes and slapping liens on properties and throwing people out of meetings. And her eyes are trained on Mr. Henderson's okra. Now, Mr. Henderson is a retired professor. He writes poetry and collects tropical butterflies and sees beauty in unexpected places. Like this okra. When Doris criticizes him at the next HOA meeting, he recites a poem about pods bursting open on hot tin roofs. When she threatens him with fines, he counters with a quote from Emerson. And when she accuses him of bringing down property values, he smiles and says, "My dear Doris, you are confusing values. You confuse money with humanity." And Doris, who has never been called a mistake in her entire life, fumes as she stalks out of the room. Then she gets an idea. She marches right up to old Mr. Henderson, confronts him with the weapon that finally makes him back down, and tells him he's blocking her Wi-Fi signal. On the small table beside her, a printed envelope sat, unopened. It's embossed, HOA seal. Unmistakable. She waited. Let the moment breathe. Let the bird song carry the weight first. Then, with calm hands, she broke the seal. The letter was longer than usual, for full pages. Legal citations, demands, warnings. They accused her of interference with neighborhood uniformity, non-compliant landscaping, and most boldly obstruction of safety-related visibility zones. They called her garden a visual hazard, and in the final paragraph in thinly veiled terms, they warned her that further non-cooperation could result in escalated enforcement protocols. Mariam folded the letter once, then again, until it fit neatly into her back pocket. She didn't speak, not to herself, not to the wind. Instead, she rose. She walked past the lavender, the globe thistle, the native sunflowers now towering higher than the mailbox. Past the picket gate and across the street to the town hall. She didn't ask for a meeting. She asked for public records. She requested permits, zoning maps, surveillance logs, a list of current board members, and their declared affiliations. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but she handed over everything. And Miriam read it all. That night, she wrote letters, handwritten, 3 pages each. She cited federal case law, referenced the Pollinator Protection Act, attached copies of her certified sanctuary designation. She didn't threaten. She informed. and with every word, the quiet power of truth. By sunrise, one of the board members had already resigned. The next day, 2 more. At the HOA office window, a new sign appeared. Office closed for restructuring. Please direct inquiries to municipal mediation. Miriam didn't celebrate. She walked the edge of her garden, hands behind her back, watching bees hover between the purple cone flowers. That afternoon, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses and a conservation badge appeared at her gate. "I saw the sanctuary registry update," he said. "Sheep. I'm with the university's ecology department. Would you be willing to let our students tour the site?" Miriam smiled. "This isn't a site," she said. "It's a story." And she opened the gate. Monday, June 12th, 8 p.m. Eastern. Find the link in the description below. Now, on to this week's stories. This week, we have 3 stories. There are stories from Florida, Texas, and Washington State, and we begin in Oregon. By midweek, the skies cleared. The sun returned, not harsh but low and honey-colored, spilling gently across Miriam's front yard like a blessing. Our next story is from Florida. Florida. Here comes the sun again. Beaming down on another pristine neighborhood where the homes are uniformly beautiful and the lawns are uniformly fake. Our last story is from Texas. The solar panels glittered on the roof of the house on Mockingbird Lane, and that's all the stories I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed them. I'll see you next week. A strange thing happened. One afternoon in early summer, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Not one of those gentle buzzes. I pulled it out to find a text message from my mom who was visiting from out of town. It wasn't loud, not the kind of shift you'd noticed from a window or a car. It started with footsteps. First, a child wandered past Miriam's picket fence, notebook in hand. When I moved into my home 5 years ago, I joined a homeowners association. I wanted to learn what motivated these people. So I attended HOA meetings and sat on the board for 3 years. It was a chance to help residents improve the appearance of their properties without enforcing rigid rules. But it was hard not to worry about the cumulative effect of all the changes taking place on our block. My husband and I have a small flock of chickens who roam freely during the day. But our neighborhood is just one of many communities across the country where residents are coming together. These are the details of this story, but the feeling is very real. It can feel scary to watch change sweep through a neighborhood, but maybe change isn't such a bad thing. Maybe it's an opportunity for growth. Every morning they head straight for the arbor where they scratch around in the dirt for bugs. As I sipped my coffee, watching them peck and strut, I thought about the work the Smiths must be doing outside. Then a strange thing happened. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Not one of those gentle buzzes, but a full-bodied shake like a scolding. I pulled it out to find a text message from my mom who was visiting from out of town. She sent me a picture of our street, and I saw that something had changed. Our front strip, which up until that moment had been filled with thirsty fescue and St. Augustine grass. Their buds unfurled toward the sky like prayers being answered. This is what they looked like when my mom planted them, bare and exposed, all of us, holding our breaths. And this is what they looked like after a week, growing toward the sun and anchored to the earth. Within weeks, the Smiths' front yard had been scraped clean, and a crew was installing the hardscape. Each spring, millions of monarchs migrate north from Mexico, crossing hundreds of miles to reach their breeding grounds in the northern United States and southern Canada. Along the way, they rely on patches of milkweed to lay their eggs and sustain their caterpillars. Because of habitat loss, pesticide use, and climate change, the monarch population has declined by 90% since the 1990s. Milkweed is considered a noxious weed in many parts of the country, especially Texas. It can be toxic to livestock and other animals. And yet its showy blossoms support countless pollinators. The caterpillars that munch on its leaves will one day become magnificent creatures who depend on us to provide the plants they need to survive. Next door, the Joneses, who had been threatening to move for years, finally put their house up for sale. All of the activity left me anxious, wondering how much longer it would be before the neighborhood I loved no longer existed. Then a new family moved in down the street. I'll call them the Smiths. They brought their 2 kids out to see the house and pointed out all the things they wanted to change. Their plans included removing the existing landscaping, adding hardscape, and planting only no-native. I sat with them on their porch as they spread out photos of their vision, and I listened. They wanted a showpiece, a landscape that reflected their personalities and made a bold statement. And when they asked for advice, I offered suggestions for native plants that would require less water and provide continuous blooms. What I discovered is that most of the board members and committee chairs were volunteers who genuinely cared about our neighborhood. Their families had lived there for decades. They simply wanted to preserve the beauty of our community. During my tenure, we worked together to update the covenant, conditions and restrictions, or CC and Rs, to reflect modern sensibilities while respecting the neighborhood's history. We removed language that explicitly banned solar panels and added verbiage that encouraged water conservation and the use of native plants. We also created a process for residents to seek variances so that those with physical limitations could have accessible gardens. And those who wanted solar panels or electric vehicle charging stations could install them. At first, I liked having the extra set of hands to call when a streetlight burned out or a tree fell. But then I learned about the aesthetics committee. They patrolled our neighborhood in pairs looking for violations. One sunny afternoon, they paid me a visit because my husband and I had installed a rain barrel. The committee said it had to go because it was an eyesore. After some negotiation, we agreed to keep the rain barrel if we painted it the same color as our house. Still, I felt angry and humiliated. The whole experience made me question whether I should even stay in the neighborhood. He knelt by the milkweed, drawing a monarch caterpillar with wide eyes and careful lines. His mother watched from the sidewalk, hands folded. Later, a man in steel-toe boots, someone Miriam had only seen at the gas station, walked by holding a potted yarrow plant. He didn't say a word, just gave a respectful nod. By dusk, 3 homes on the block had placed hand-painted signs in their yards. Sanctuary in progress. Miriam said nothing. She didn't post on social media. No news crew came. But something was spreading, something deeper than defiance. It was permission. Permission to reclaim beauty without approval. Permission to plant belonging. Permission to resist, not with rage, but with roots. She sent me a picture of our street, and I saw that something had changed. The license plate matched the name of one of the remaining HOA board members. But the engine eventually faded into the night, and the car left. And that silence. The next morning, an envelope arrived, not official this time. Just handwritten, soft blue ink on cream paper. It read, "The bylaws were meant to protect peace, not destroy it. I see now what your garden does. For the air, for the bees, for us, I'm sorry." Miriam stared at the note. She didn't weep, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed it in the drawer beside the tin of native seeds. Later that day, the wind returned, carrying the faint smell of basil, rosemary. An earth freshly turned from a neighbor's lawn. From across the street, the sun dipped low behind her home, casting golden light across each leaf. A pair of doves settled on the arbor. In the distance, children laughed. A dog barked once, and Miriam breathed slowly, deeply feeling, at last, not just resistance, but resonance. Our front strip, which up until that moment had been filled with thirsty fescue, now held 6 brand new milkweed plants. Their buds unfurled toward the sky like prayers being answered. This is what they looked like when my mom planted them, bare and exposed, all of us holding our breaths. And this is what they looked like after a week, growing toward the sun and anchored to the earth. It started before that, though. That weekend, something changed. That evening, a distant car idled by for nearly half an hour. Miriam noticed. The details of this story are fictional, but the feeling is very real. After thinking it over, I decided that instead of moving, I would fight. When my term ended, I felt optimistic that I had made a difference. I even agreed to chair the aesthetics committee. I knew the Smiths had every right to do whatever they wanted with their property. And honestly, I was excited for them. Then one morning I awoke to the sound of hammering, not the mechanical tap of a power tool. You might be wondering why I chose milkweed. Milkweed is the sole host plant for the endangered monarch butterfly. As I write this, It's hard to believe that my homeowners association would allow milkweed to be planted on the strip between the sidewalk and the road. It was on the 7th morning that the garden began to whisper differently. Not with wind or bees this time, but with footsteps. Soft, hesitant. A woman approached the gate, dressed in a plain gray blazer. Her shoulders stiff, her expression unreadable. Maryam recognized her from old HOA bulletins. Marla Evans, one of the first to vote for the uniformity ordinance a year ago. From inside, Maryam lit a candle by her windowsill, its glow flickering gently between the leaves. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't hear the whir of drones overhead. One from a neighbor asking if they could meet and discuss a potential garden project. Another from a friend who wanted to know where she'd gotten the stones for her new stepping path. A third from a local nursery owner, asking if he could feature her garden in an upcoming workshop on edible landscaping. Even the HOA president reached out, suggesting a meeting to discuss revisions to the community covenants. And most exciting of all, Marla sent a quick message reading, "How can I help?" Beneath it, a photo of a freshly planted milkweed seedling. That afternoon, Maryam pulled on a pair of gloves and dug in. Over the next few days, whispers rippled through the neighborhood, carrying news of a blooming rebellion. Someone hung a hummingbird feeder outside their apartment window. An elderly widow planted her first butterfly bush, her late husband's favorite flowers. A young mother filled her raised beds with sunflowers, zinnias, and yarrow. A group of teenagers set up a lemonade stand to raise money for a bluebird trail. Across the landscape, people came out of their houses, blinking in the sunlight, holding paintbrushes, shovels, even chainsaws. They worked side by side, sharing tools and seeds, stories and smiles. Some moved carefully, methodically, while others plunged in with abandon. All were welcome. Everywhere, plants once deemed invasive and undesirable sprouted anew. Common milkweed, cardinal flower, purple coneflower, black-eyed Susan, little bluestem, and switchgrass all burst forth, transforming the landscape. Within weeks, the neighborhood, once sterile and sad, now pulsed with life. Bees hummed from bloom to bloom. A red-bellied woodpecker drummed on a dead snag. A family of ducks paddled serenely through a newly restored wetland. Children chased dragonflies, their laughter echoing in the warm air. On a cool evening in September, the residents gathered for a potluck dinner in Maryam's front yard. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, they toasted the transformation, celebrating with stories and songs, laughter and gratitude. During a quiet moment later in the evening, Maryam's phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was from the mayor, asking if he could visit and learn more about the community's efforts. Below it, a photo of a tiny spotted ladybug crawling on a leaf. Gazing up at the night sky, sprinkled with 1,000 points of light, Maryam smiled. Just 1 year ago, this garden had been a battleground. But together, they'd bloomed where they'd been planted. They'd taken root and grown beyond expectations. And in doing so, they'd become a powerful force. They were a wildflower rebellion, and they were just getting started. There were still a few cars passing by, though. So, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miriam switched off her porch light. She retreated further into the shadowy interior of her house, drawing the blinds, locking the doors, turning off the alarm. As darkness fell, she lit a single candle, its flame dancing in the still air. Outside, a shooting star streaked across the twilight sky. And just as it faded, a second candle flickered to life. Then, a third. Beside each one, a small card bearing a handwritten note. "Welcome to the Wildflower Rebellion. We see you, we hear you, we are listening. Together we can grow something beautiful. Sign in with a colored pencil. Sprinkle a pinch of dirt on top. To hide the writing, leave one by your door, one by your window, one in your mailbox. Let them know you heard the call. Let them know you will join the growing chorus." She didn't speak right away, just stood there, eyes scanning the wildflower sprawl, the hand-labeled seed stakes, the bee hotels made from bundled cane and wood. Together we can grow something beautiful. After dropping off her last offering, Mariam returned to the garden, stepping through the gate into the growing darkness. In the soft shadows, she couldn't help smiling. She hummed an old tune as she gathered up fallen branches, dried leaves, and loose twigs. She knew just what to do with them later. Then she looked up. "I used to be proud of how straight my hedges were," she said quietly. "But I haven't seen a butterfly on my property in years." Miriam didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside and gently opened the gate. Marla hesitated, then entered just one step. Her patent leather heels sank slightly into the soft soil, and a breeze lifted the hem of her jacket. "I thought wild meant messy," she whispered. "But this feels..." She paused. Miriam offered her a single marigold bloom. "Structured chaos," Miriam said softly. "Like nature always intended." Marla held the flower like a question. Within an hour, a monarch landed on it like an answer. By noon that day, a new ordinance draft was quietly circulated among the remaining HOA members. It called for the establishment of a community biodiversity zone and suggested that landscaping standards allow certified ecological practices. No fines, no threats. Later that week, Miriam sat with 3 neighbors beneath the shade of her maple tree. They drank chamomile tea and mapped out native plant guilds on large pieces of brown paper. They talked about water runoff, bees, birdsong, and how children learned differently when surrounded by living things. At one point, a teenager from 2 blocks over arrived with a drone in hand. "I used to fly this over your house," he admitted. "My dad's idea." He placed the drone gently in the grass. "I deleted all the footage," he said. Miriam didn't scold him. She simply nodded, placing a single pebble on the center of their paper map, marking his home. That evening, the air turned cooler. The garden shimmered beneath a lavender sky. A quiet hush settled in. Welcome to the Wildflower Rebellion. We see you, we hear you, we are listening. Next morning, her phone buzzed with messages. Now, before I begin, I'm going to ask you to do 3 things. First, please remember, this is an audio-first experience. The way they paused when they saw her outside, the way they lingered on the sidewalk, offering cuttings from their own gardens without needing words. There was a peace that had crept into the air, not declared, not announced, but grown. So if you're listening on something like Spotify or Apple, this will make sense. Second, please don't eat while listening. Trust me, I want this to be immersive. This neighborhood prided itself on order, on sameness. But the garden had become a place of permission, an invitation, and eventually, a command. By mid-afternoon, 4 more yards had signs posted discreetly near their mailboxes. This is my book, and this is episode 9 of our series. We've been doing these short videos because honestly, sometimes it's hard to find time to read a whole novel. But stories like this remind us that small actions can make a big difference. Plant a tree, grow some native plants, create a butterfly habitat. You don't have to do everything, but even small actions can have a big impact. Remember, you won't have to accept the status quo, and that you can always make positive changes in your own backyard and in your communities. Thank you for joining us for another episode of our audio short story series. If you enjoyed this story, please consider leaving us a review. We'd love to hear what you think. Thank you for listening. One woman's decision to grow a garden has transformed an entire community. It is a powerful reminder that we do not have to accept the status quo, and that we can always make positive changes in our own backyards and in our communities. It's also a reminder to appreciate the power of community. Miriam didn't do this alone. She worked with her neighbors, shared her knowledge and skills, and together they created something truly special. This story is a reminder that we're all in this together and that we can achieve more when we work together than when we try to go it alone. Finally, this story is a celebration of nature. From the butterflies and bees to the birds and beyond, nature is an integral part of our world and we need to protect and preserve it. Miriam's garden is a testament to the beauty and importance of the natural world and a reminder that we can all play a role in protecting it. Also, we love short stories. We grew up on picture books and fairy tales. And maybe it's because of our ADHD, but we find satisfaction in seeing a complete thought through to its end. Plus, this way you can sample our flavor before diving into the full meal. Certified wildlife-friendly habitat. Miriam didn't issue them. She simply taught the process, shared the forms, explained the species, lent her gloves. When Merriam-Webster moved into her home in Austin, Texas, she discovered there were some problems with the Homeowners Association. specifically that they demanded perfect lawns and the use of pesticides. So she did something crazy. She started letting her lawn go wild. See, she knew that there were rules against it. But she also knew that there was a group of homeowners who had been trying to change those rules for years, but they hadn't made much progress. So Miriam decided to start her own little rebellion, one weed at a time. She began by planting native plants that don't require watering, which is important in a desert climate like Austin's. Then she started inviting butterflies and bees to her yard. Soon her yard became a haven for wildlife. And she started getting letters from her neighbors, asking her how she managed to keep her yard so lush and green without watering it. That's when Miriam realized she could turn the HOA's own rules against them. See, the HOA required that residents submit a landscape plan before making any major changes to their lawn. So Miriam got to work creating a plan for her entire neighborhood. She worked with experts to identify native plants that would thrive in the area and created a map showing where each plant should go. She presented her plan to the HOA. In fact, they even gave her an award for her efforts. As it turns out, the HOA was actually pretty happy about all this, because they didn't realize how much their residents wanted to make changes to their lawns. But Miriam knew that once her neighbors saw how beautiful her yard looked, they would want the same thing for themselves. Her plan inspired other homeowners to take action, and soon the entire neighborhood was transformed into a wildlife sanctuary. Today, Miriam's garden continues to be a haven for wildlife, and she continues to inspire other people to do the same. The other, an assortment of milkweed seeds. 4 weeks. The garden had been a flurry of activity, but now it was changing. I've never seen so much peace in a conflict story. She admitted. Miriam chuckled, brushing soil from her fingertips. There was conflict, she said. But the resolution wasn't in the noise. What had begun as individual growth was becoming a shared space. The garden had become a place of discovery, of permission, of wonder. It trended, not for outrage, not for controversy. People shared their own stories. A woman in Arizona who let her yard go wild. A man in Illinois who planted prairie grasses along the fence. A family in Vermont who turned their pool into a frog pond. And all of them wrote the same line, "We didn't know we were allowed." And third, please, leave us a review. Reviews help other people find this. They validate our existence. And also, we're trying to hit a milestone. Their songs filled the early morning with notes softer than any alarm. Now, sitting on her rocking chair again, Miriam's notebook was open, but this time, she listened. The wind carried sounds she didn't recognize. Laughter. Shovels in soft earth. The rustle of seed packets. And every once in a while, a new voice asking, "Would you mind helping me start one too? So it would really help us out?" Thank you. By the 9th week, something unspoken had taken root. Miriam noticed it in the quiet exchanges between neighbors. One morning, as dew clung to the tall blades of native grasses, Miriam found a note taped gently to her gate. Not from the HOA, not official, just folded parchment paper with soft cursive ink. Can we plant a bee bath near your porch? We'd like to learn where they land. It was signed R. Martinez from Lot 14. She smiled and placed a clean ceramic dish beneath the butterfly bush that afternoon. It filled with rain by evening. The next day, 2 children came with painted stones to decorate its base. The girl held a paintbrush like a conductor's baton, and the boy clutched a magnifying glass. "We think they like the blue flowers most," he whispered. That day, Miriam received 2 new packages. One contained a butterfly house. Even the birds had returned in numbers, warblers and finches nesting in the overgrown hedges. The HOA once called hazards. In the old days, that question would have been unthinkable. A few weeks later, a local journalist stopped by. A young woman with wide eyes and a recorder she kept nervously clicking on and off. The article ran 2 days later. Garden sparks quiet revolution in suburbia. Welcome to my channel. This particular story was inspired by real events. So why is this story important? Well, sometimes it can feel like the world is too chaotic and overwhelming to deal with. So, if you're feeling inspired to make a difference in your own backyard, then why not get started today? So last week we left off with Miriam, hearing back from her lawyer about her fight against her HOA. And the good news is, we get to pick up right. So let's go ahead and dive into the 10th week. First, you watch. You see what needs tending, then you ask how. Now, she could feel the land taking root again in her own yard, blossoming beyond the neat rows of her original plan. She tossed a handful of sand into the yard. "Here," she said, "you can keep the rest." That night at dinner, she told Josh about the letter. Puzzled, she walked out to the curb to see Mr. Ellis hanging a sign on his lawn. "Hello," she called out, waving. He grinned back. "I saw you looking for something to do last week." From it stepped the same conservation officer who had once walked carefully through her garden. She walked to the window and watched the sunset bleed into the horizon, staining the clouds the color of rust. Tonight, she would tell Josh, and tomorrow, they would start packing. But this time, he brought a plaque. He didn't speak right away, just walked the path of crushed bark, breathed in the scent of wild basil, and stopped beneath the maple where butterflies always gathered. Then he turned. "In our entire state," he said, "this is the first community where every homeowner has signed the restoration commitment." He held up the plaque. Certified Neighborhood Wildlife Sanctuary, ESD this year. Miriam took it with both hands. Not for her. For them. The ones who'd whispered first. The ones who planted lavender in secret. The ones who asked if bees really danced. She placed the plaque near the sidewalk where everyone could see. Not in gold, not in marble, but carved into warm cedar wood like something that had always belonged there. Thought maybe we could spruce up our signs. How does this look?" He yelled over the sound of nailing. "Perfect," she shouted back, smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. He listened, stirring his tomato soup. "So," he asked finally. She watched it stop in front of Mr. Ellis's house. Hadn't he gotten a new truck? She wondered, and stood up to get a better look. That's when she saw the logo on the side. County logo. She hurried inside and out the back door. Sure enough, there was the same conservation officer from the meeting. He was talking to Mr. Ellis, both of them gesturing toward the road. Mariam waved. "Hey," she called out, "what's going on?" He turned and saw her, then hurried toward her. "Just finishing up our site visit," he said, offering her a small cardstock box. Inside, nestled on a bed of straw, were 4 tiny rooted cuttings. "Thought you might need a little more milkweed." "Oh, wow. Thank you," she said, surprised. "We haven't finished cutting everything back yet, but if you want more, just let us know." He beamed at her, then climbed back into his truck. She watched him go, feeling a blush creep up her neck. Why did she have the feeling he was hiding something? "Well, I think we should probably start prepping for a move. You want to see something cool?" he asked, grinning. "Sure," she replied, still blushing, following him around to the front of her house. There, leaning against the porch railing, was a brand new sign. In lettering almost as big as Mariam herself, it read, "Welcome to Certified Neighborhood Wildlife Sanctuary." Below that, in much smaller print, was the establishment date. She blinked. "What?" Mr. Ellis shrugged. "I figured if you weren't gonna put out your own numbers, neither would I. Besides..." He winked, then hurried off to finish his project. Shaking her head, Mariam laughed. What was she gonna do? Tell him he wasn't supposed to remove the sign. She reached for the seedlings, tucking them into the crook of her arm. She could hardly wait to show Josh. This place won't be our forever home if we can't even grow vegetables. "I thought we agreed," he started, but she raised her hand. "You want to come with me? We could buy a house in the county, start a real garden, have chickens, goats, a whole orchard." His eyes widened. Like what happened to the HOA not bothering us anymore? They will once they realize no one's paying dues. She stared back at him. Then what? Then, he whispered, we plant more trees. Her coneflowers had gone to seed, which meant the goldfinches would be back soon. One by one, she pulled out the offending hibiscus and crepe myrtle. The purple coneflowers stayed, along with the blazing stars and bee balm. But the cardinal flower bed had to go entirely. Even the oak tree felt too big for the space. Next, she ordered dozens of plugs from her favorite nursery. Instead of hydrangeas, she got black chokeberries and silky dogwood. Where the crepe myrtles had choked the ground, she put in a fragrant wild rose. She spread a blanket on the driveway and sat surrounded by pots of milkweed and joe pye weed, admiring the fat bumblebee that buzzed from bloom to bloom. Finally, she picked up her phone and called the county extension office. They had a backlog of requests, she was told, but they would come by in a couple weeks to take down her house numbers. There was nothing else she could do until then. So she went to sit in her yard, breathe in the astringent smell of drying mint, and watch the butterflies lay their tiny striped eggs on the underside of milkweed leaves. And the fragrant wild bergamot was already sticky with ripening juice for the bees. As for the butterfly weed, it had grown so rampant, its orange flames licking at the fence, that she would have to dig some up and move them to less conspicuous places. She looked down at the packet in her hand. Evening primrose, the one thing that still hadn't found purchase in her garden. She turned it over. Full sun, average soil, water when dry. And yet somehow it refused to grow here. Maybe it just needed a little more time. She tucked it back into her pocket. 10th week was quieter than the rest. Not empty, just settled. Birdsong had woven itself into the morning breeze, like it had always been there. The soil smelled deeper now, richer, like it remembered what it was for. Still, plenty of summer left, she thought. And most years, she would have been looking forward to late-season blooms. But this year, her thoughts kept drifting to fall, to the coming frost that would whiten the grass and turn the leaves the color of rust. In August, the conservation officer had sent her a list of steps for what came next. Secure your perimeter, he wrote. Ensure all native plants are well established. Remove non-native ornamentals if possible. Plant more natives. And finally, check with your local municipality about removing your address numbers and mailbox. If there's one thing homeowners associations hate, it's ambiguity. So Mariam went inside to clear out her garage. Mariam stood in her front yard, one hand resting gently on a seed packet. Around her, the once non-compliant plants swayed in perfect harmony. Lavender, golden aster, switchgrass, milkwoodall, blooming not in defiance. Across the street, another neighbor, Mr. Ellis, hung a wooden sign outside his home. And next door, someone had built a small bench shaped like a leaf under their newly planted dogwood. Mariam smiled, but didn't move. She let the wind pass first. Mariam had been patient. Her grandfather had taught her well. When you want to help nature, you don't rush in. She remembered him saying, "You listen." A sudden clap of thunder made her jump. Hail? No. Just clouds passing overhead. There were boxers full of things she and her husband had collected during their travels. Souvenirs from beaches and mountains, clay whistles from Mexico, smooth river stones from Oregon. That weekend, Mariam got to work. And then something extraordinary happened. The next Saturday, she woke up to the sound of hammering, saw a ladder propped against her house. As soon as he was out of sight, Mr. Ellis strolled over, carrying a pruning saw. A single truck rolled up, plain white, county logo on the side. Later that day, Miriam heard back from her lawyer. Yes, she had a case.